In the harsh, unforgiving land of Africa, something happened that forced an entire elephant herd to stop. An albino baby elephant, too weak, too visible, and too fragile, collapsed in the middle of a dangerous migration corridor. Every passing minute could have been his last. But instead of walking away to save themselves, the herd made a decision no one expected. Not through miracles, not through brute strength, but through a choice so rare it made nature itself pause and watch. This is not just a story about survival. It is a story about the cost of loyalty. The first thing you noticed was the color, wrong for this place. In the hard noon light of the Amboseli Tsavo corridor, everything wore the same palette. Tawny grass, gray dust, heat shimmering like a thin sheet of glass over the earth. Even the elephants, usually so unmistakable, looked washed out by the sun. But the calf on the ground didn't blend into anything. He was pale as bone, a small body laid on its side, as if the land had finally refused to carry him. They called him Ghost. His skin, usually a deep living gray in other calves, was almost white, mottled with faint pink around the ears where the blood ran close to the surface. Dust clung to him in a chalky layer. His ribs rose and fell in short, uneven lifts. Every breath sounded like a bargain the world wasn't interested in renewing. Maya stood over him, her front legs braced wide, her trunk sweeping and tapping in frantic little passes, over his face, over his shoulder, down the length of his belly. She tried to nudge him up the way mothers do when a calf is only tired. She tried again when he didn't move. Then she pressed her forehead against his side as if sheer weight could push life back into him. Around them, the herd formed a wide circle. No trumpet, no chaotic shoving. Just bodies, tall and still, facing outward at the edges and inward at the center, like a living fence built in silence. The matriarch Ruth stood, slightly off to Maya's left, her tusks dull with dust, her eyes half-lidded but alert. She didn't rush in. She didn't touch the calf. She simply watched, and that restraint felt heavier than panic. In the corridor, stopping was never safe. The ground here cracked open in thin lines like old pottery. The wind carried a dry, metallic taste, and the sun pressed down as if it had a grudge. Water was not a guarantee. Shade was a luxury. Every minute spent standing still was a minute predators could measure. Even hunger waited politely compared to thirst. Maya knew all of that. The herd knew it too. But Maya was a mother first, and the world can argue with that all it wants. Ghost's eyelids fluttered. For a moment, it looked like he might try, like he might gather the last of his strength and push himself upright. His trunk twitched once, then fell limp again, a small rope dropped by a tired hand. Maya made a low sound deep in her chest, not loud enough to be called a cry, but old enough to be recognized by anything that had ever been loved. Ruth shifted her weight. A few of the adults at the outer ring adjusted their stance, turning their heads to the wind. One of them, Duke, the younger bull with a scar along his ear, lifted his trunk high and held it there, tasting the air. That was when the smell arrived. It wasn't lion, it wasn't hyena. It was something sharper, something that didn't belong with sun and grass, an oily trace like smoke trapped in metal. The kind of scent that carried stories of fences, of wire, of pain that came without teeth. The kind of scent that made even the toughest animals reconsider the direction of their next step. Duke's ears flared. He took 2 steps out from the circle, then stopped, listening. Far off, so faint it could have been imagined, came a sound that didn't match the land. An engine, low and steady, not the thunder of hooves or the rush of wind, but a mechanical hum that rose and fell as it moved across. Uneven ground. It was still distant. It was still time. But distance in an open corridor is a short-lived comfort. Maya didn't look up. She couldn't afford to. She pressed her trunk under Ghost's chest, trying to lever him. The calf's legs folded like grass stems. He made a small, wet exhale, and his head rolled back, exposing the soft underside of his throat. Maya froze, then moved faster. her trunk sweeping over his mouth, then his ear, as if she could wipe the weakness away. Ruth remained still. That stillness wasn't indifference. It was calculation. The kind a family makes when the bills are due and the savings are thin, when you're weighing what you can pay now versus what you might lose later. People in the human world call it planning, life insurance, health insurance, all those careful policies meant to keep catastrophe from ruining you. Out here, there were no papers to sign and no customer service number to call. There was only the herd and the next choice. AC? Slight murmur ran through the ring, not sound, but motion. A few of the younger females glanced toward the horizon, then back to Ghost. One of them, June, stamped once, impatient and afraid. The corridor punished hesitation. June had seen it. They all had. Ruth's gaze moved from Ghost to Maya, to the line of cracked earth stretching ahead. Then she looked toward a patch of land that seemed no different from any other, dry, sun-bleached, scattered with low brush. But Ruth's eyes lingered there as if she remembered something under the surface. Old water, old seasons, a place where the ground had once been soft. The engine sound grew a fraction louder, then faded behind a gust of wind. Duke swung his trunk lower and pointed it toward the source, a silent warning. He didn't bolt. He didn't signal retreat. He simply held the line, like a guard posted at the edge of a home. Maya rocked gently over Ghost, steadying him with her body. She used her trunk to dust his back, to cool him, by covering that bright, vulnerable skin with the only protection she could find. The dust made him look less like a beacon. It also made him look more like a ghost in the literal sense, something already fading. Ghost's breathing changed again. 2 quick pulls, then a pause. The pause stretched. Maya stiffened. The entire circle seemed to tighten, every spine going rigid at once, as if the herd shared a single nervous system. Then Ghost inhaled, thin but present. Maya let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She pressed her trunk to his cheek, and for the first time, Ghost's mouth moved against her touch, barely there, like a promise whispered from a long way off. Ruth took one slow step forward. It wasn't much. It wasn't a rescue. It wasn't even a decision yet. But in that single step was a message the herd understood. You are not alone in this center circle. Not today. The wind shifted again and carried the metallic scent stronger, along with something else, faint, sharp, and wrong. The kind of smell you get when steel rubs against steel, when a trap is near, when the ground hides a threat that doesn't make a sound until it bites. Duke's head lifted. June's feet shuffled. Maya's eyes stayed locked on her calf. And Ruth stood between the dying and the distance, looking out across the corridor as if she could see the next hour laid out like a map. In the human world, a person might call an estate planning attorney when the stakes are high, or talk about home equity, or a reverse mortgage, searching for one more way to keep the roof from collapsing. Ruth had none of that. She had only the herd. The engine hummed again, closer now, then cut briefly, as if whoever drove it had slowed. Somewhere beyond the brush, something metal clicked. Maya's trunk tightened under Ghost's chest. The circle held, and in that held breath of the savannah, between thirst and danger, between leaving and staying, the story made its first hard promise. The world was about to ask the herd for more than love. It was about to demand something extraordinary. The story of how Ghost became a liability did not begin on the day he collapsed. It began the moment he stood out. Hours earlier, when the heat was already heavy, but not yet cruel, the herd had been moving in a long, patient line through the corridor. Calves usually disappeared into the bodies around them, swallowed by gray hides and swinging legs. Ghost never did. Even when Maya tried to keep him tight to her side, his pale skin caught the light and threw it back at the world. From a distance, he looked less like an elephant and more like a mistake. Something left uncovered. Maya knew it. She walked slightly angled, placing her bulk between Ghost and the open land. Every few minutes, she scooped dust with her trunk and coated his back, his head, his ears. The dust helped, the way a thin roof helps in a storm. It made the sun bearable, but it didn't make him invisible. June noticed first. She had been keeping pace along the left flank, younger than Maya, but old enough to understand what delay costs. When she turned her head and caught sight of Ghost lagging again, her ears stiffened. She slowed, then stopped altogether, forcing a ripple through the line. Ruth paused the herd with a single shift of her body. June stepped closer, not aggressive, just worried. Her trunk brushed the ground, then lifted toward Ghost, hovering without touching. He swayed on his feet, blinking too slowly, his legs trembling in a way calves should have outgrown weeks ago. "He's burning," June seemed to say, though no words were spoken. The heat rolled off him in waves. Maya answered by dusting him again. She pressed her side to his, steadying him, daring the world to argue, but even she could feel it, his skin too hot, his movements dull. Ghost wasn't just tired, he was losing ground. They moved on. The corridor narrowed, grass thinning until it gave way to patches of exposed earth. That was when Duke lifted his trunk and froze. The smell hit a second later, sharp and cold, like rust left in the rain. Maya felt it too, and her heart sank. Wire. The herd slowed to a careful crawl. Ruth adjusted their path by degrees, not enough to panic anyone, just enough to avoid the obvious danger. Duke moved ahead, testing the ground with exaggerated care. Ghost did not. His foot caught the line where it lay half hidden beneath the grass. It wasn't a full snare, more like the edge of one, abandoned or poorly set. But it was enough. He stumbled forward with a thin cry and went down hard, his legs scraping against the metal as he fell. The sound was wrong, a sharp ringing scrape that cut through the heat like glass breaking. Chaos threatened to follow. June startled and stepped back. Another calf squealed. Duke wheeled around, ears flared wide, charging the brush where the wire disappeared, snapping stems and flattening grass in a blind surge of fury. For a heartbeat, the herd compressed inward, bodies pressing close, the danger of trampling suddenly real. Maya reacted without thinking. She planted herself over Ghost, legs braced, trunk sweeping him tight against her chest. A passing shoulder clipped her side, hard enough to make her grunt, but she held. Then Ruth stepped forward, decisive and loud. She didn't trumpet. She rumbled, a deep commanding sound that vibrated through bone and soil. The herd answered immediately, spreading back out, restoring order as if pulled by an invisible thread. Duke returned, breathing hard, eyes bright. The wire lay torn and twisted behind him, useless now. Ghost lay still, a thin line of blood darkened the dust along his leg. Not much, but enough. Maya bent low, inspecting the wound, her trunk gentle now, almost reverent. Ghost stirred, letting out a weak sound that might have been pain or fear. His body shook once, then stilled again. The smell of blood carried farther than dust, ever. They couldn't stay. Ruth signaled forward movement, and the herd obeyed, slower now, tighter than before. Maya walked awkwardly, keeping Ghost tucked close, stopping whenever his steps faltered. Each pause cost them time. Each minute under the sun drained something they couldn't replace. June watched the horizon more than she watched Ghost. She had seen corridors like this before, how they punished hesitation, how they demanded payment in the form of dehydration and loss. In the human world, people talk about risk management, about having the right insurance coverage so one accident doesn't ruin everything. Out here, the coverage was the herd itself, and even that had limits. The smell of metal lingered. So did something else. Tracks. Ruth noticed them first, shallow prints crossing their path, human-made, pressed deep by weight and time. They were old, but not ancient. Nearby, the grass bent in patterns that didn't belong to wind or animals. June shuddered. Everyone knew what followed human tracks. Fences, traps, noise, confusion. Even when humans meant well, their presence bent the rules of survival. The herd angled away, but the detour lengthened the journey, stretching the distance to water they were no longer certain existed. Ghost stumbled again, This time he didn't fall, but he leaned hard into Maya, his head drooping. His breath came faster now, shallow and uneven. The heat wrapped around him like a blanket soaked in fire. Maya stopped and dusted him again and again, coating his wound, his back, his ears. She tried to cool him the only way she knew. Her movements were steady, but inside something was breaking. She could feel his weight sagging more with each step. Ruth watched the sky, the ground, the herd, calculating. She knew the signs. She had seen calves fade before. Usually the rule was simple and brutal: keep moving or lose everyone. But Ghost was different. Not because he was white, because the herd had already paid for. Him, paid in time, in risk, in injury. Because leaving him now would make all of that meaningless. The engine sound drifted in again, faint but unmistakable. Duke lifted his trunk. June shifted closer to the center. Maya tightened her hold on Ghost, as if she could anchor him to the earth. And somewhere in Ruth's memory, a different season stirred. A year when water had pooled beneath cracked soil, when survival had come from remembering what the land once was, not what it looked like now. The corridor offered no guarantees, no safety net, no retirement planning for the weak. Only the next decision and the cost attached to it. Ghost took one more step, then another, and then his legs folded. The ground rushed up to meet him, and this time there was no strength left to fight it. The fall this time was different. Ghost didn't cry out. He didn't thrash or scramble the way calves do when surprise turns into fear. His legs simply gave way beneath him, folding as if someone had loosened the joints from the inside. He dropped onto his chest first, then tipped sideways, dust puffing up around his pale body in a dull, tired cloud. Maya stopped so abruptly that June nearly collided with her flank. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Maya was there, her trunk sliding under Ghost's neck, lifting his head before it could strike the ground again. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, breathing hard, her body angled to shield him from the open corridor. Ghost's eyes were half open now, unfocused, rolling slightly, as if he were looking past her instead of at her. Ruth stepped forward, and the herd closed ranks instinctively, forming a tighter circle than before. Duke moved outward, scanning the grass with sharp, deliberate turns of his head. The wind shifted, and with it came the faint but unmistakable scent of blood. It was not much, just a thin, dark smear along Ghost's leg, where the wire had kissed him earlier. But blood had a way of changing the math. It spoke to predators in a language older than sound. Maya found the wound and went still. She traced it gently with the tip of her trunk, careful not to press too hard. Ghost flinched, then sagged again, his breathing uneven, faster than it should have been. Maya dusted the scrape, packing dry earth against it in the only form of first aid available to her. She did it again when the blood seeped through. June shifted her weight from foot to foot, her eyes darting to the horizon. Every pause felt like an hour. The sun had climbed higher, and the heat now pressed down without mercy. Even the strongest adults were beginning to show it, ears flapping harder, mouths open, tongues visible for brief moments before snapping shut again. Ruth watched it all without comment. She knew the signs as well as Maya did. Shock didn't always arrive loud and dramatic. Sometimes it slipped in quietly, riding heat and dehydration, stealing strength one breath at a time. Ghost wasn't just injured. He was unraveling. Duke caught another scent and froze. This one was familiar, unwelcome, and close. Hyena. Not a pack yet, not the confident, reckless chorus that meant numbers, but scouts. Curious noses testing the air, gauging distance, opportunity. Duke rumbled low in his chest. A warning meant as much for the herd as for whatever lurked beyond the grass. Maya tried again. She wedged her trunk beneath Ghost's chest and leaned, muscles straining, urging him upward. Ghost's legs twitched. For a moment, it looked like he might manage it. His back legs straightened halfway, then buckled, sending a jolt through his body that drew a sharp exhale from Maya. She steadied him, heart hammering. Ruth took another step forward, closer now, her shadow falling across Ghost's pale flank. She lowered her head, studying him the way one might study a ledger when the numbers no longer add up. In the human world, people sit down with financial planning advisors when the stakes are high, weighing long-term care insurance against immediate costs, trying to protect what matters most before it's too late. Out here, Ruth had no spreadsheets, no Medicare supplement plans, no safety net beyond the bodies standing with her. Only choices. The smell of metal returned, stronger this time. June spotted it first, a second length of wire half buried near the base of a bush, its end twisted into a crude loop. A trap, poorly hidden but effective all the same. The corridor was littered with them, ghosts of human intention left behind when plans changed or time ran out. June shuddered and backed away. One misstep from panic, and the circle could collapse inward again. Ruth rumbled, low and steady, restoring calm by force of will alone. Duke moved in, snapping the wire with practiced efficiency, but the damage had already been done. The smell, the blood, the delay, all of it added up to something the land would not ignore. Maya pressed her body tighter around Ghost, rocking slightly, a rhythm meant to soothe him even as her own strength began to drain. She could feel it now, the tremor in her legs, the ache in her side where she'd taken that earlier blow. She pushed it down. Mothers always do. Ghost's breathing changed again, quick, shallow pulls that barely seemed to fill his lungs. His trunk twitched weakly against the ground, then lay still. June looked to Ruth, fear plain in her posture. If they stayed, the hyenas would grow bold. If they moved, Ghost might not survive the effort. There was no good option left, only less terrible ones. Ruth lifted her head and looked ahead, past the traps, past the cracked earth, toward a stretch of land most would have dismissed as empty. To an untrained eye, it was nothing but dry soil and scrub. To Ruth, it was memory, of seasons long gone, of water that once ran underground, even when the surface lied. The engine sound drifted in again, closer now, then faded as if whoever drove it had slowed, uncertain. Human presence complicated everything. Sometimes it meant danger, sometimes it meant restraint. Either way, it bent the rules. Ghost stirred faintly, his eye rolling toward Maya, unfocused but present. He made a sound, so small it barely registered, but real. Maya answered immediately, pressing her trunk to his mouth, her breath warm and fast. She dusted him again, covering the wound, covering the white skin, as if hiding him might buy time. Ruth made a decision then, not the full one, not yet, but enough to change the direction of what came next. She turned her body slightly, angling the herd toward that unremarkable patch of ground ahead. June noticed and straightened. Duke shifted position to cover the rear. The circle loosened, then reformed, careful and deliberate. Ghost remained on the ground. The sun burned overhead. The hyenas watched. The wire lay broken, but remembered. And in the space between staying and leaving, between loss and risk, the herd took its next step into something they could not yet see, but would soon have to believe in. Time lost its shape after Ghost fell. Minutes stretched thin and brittle, each one bending under the weight of what it might cost. The herd stood in a tighter ring now, closer than before, bodies angled inward as if they could seal the center off from reality itself. The sun climbed higher, bleaching the land until even shadows looked exhausted. Ghost lay on his side, chest rising and falling in shallow motions that barely disturbed the dust on his skin. His eyes were open but distant, reflecting light without recognition. The wound on his leg had stopped bleeding, but the heat had taken over, spreading through him in waves that made his muscles twitch. Maya did not leave his side. She stood with her legs planted wide, bracing herself like a pillar holding up a failing roof. Her trunk never stopped moving. Over Ghost's face, his ears, the curve of his back, checking, soothing, insisting. Every so often she tried again to lift, him sliding her trunk beneath his chest, leaning her weight into the effort. Each attempt ended the same way. Ghost's legs would shudder, straighten just enough to tease hope, and then fold again. The sound of his body settling back onto the ground grew heavier each time, as if gravity itself were growing impatient. June watched with a tight, restless energy. She paced a few steps, then stopped, then paced again, her gaze flicking between Ghost and the open corridor ahead. She had seen this moment before, though never with a calf this young. There came a point when staying stopped being loyalty and started becoming a threat to everyone. Duke felt it too. He stood near the rear of the ring, ears flared, trunk raised, scanning constantly. The hyena scent was stronger now, not close enough to see, but close enough to know they were being assessed. Predators didn't rush elephants. They waited. They counted. They looked for weakness and hesitation the way people in the human world look for leverage, whether it's in a legal dispute, a real estate negotiation, or a high-stakes insurance claim where timing means everything. Ruth said nothing. That silence was the hardest part. The matriarch stood a few paces from Maya, angled slightly toward the open land, her posture balanced and unreadable. She watched Ghost's breathing. She watched Maya's strength draining in small, invisible increments. She watched the herd, how some leaned inward, how others unconsciously edged toward the direction of travel. She was measuring something no one else could afford to. The engine sound returned, clearer now. Not loud, not aggressive, just present, a reminder that humans were near. Somewhere beyond the brush, someone was moving slowly, cautiously. It wasn't the reckless noise of hunters charging in. It was the careful approach of people who knew they were guests in a dangerous place. June stiffened at the sound. Humans meant fences, traps, disruption. Even when they came to help, their help often came with consequences that rippled outward. Maya didn't react. She lowered her head and pressed her forehead against Ghost's side, holding it there longer than before. Her breathing was heavy now, her sides heaving with effort. She made a sound then, low, deep, and unmistakable. A distress rumble. It wasn't loud enough to echo across the plains. It wasn't meant for predators or rivals. It was meant for family. A sound mothers make when the math has turned against them and love alone is no longer enough. The effect was immediate. The herd stilled completely, as if frozen in place. June stopped pacing. Duke lowered his trunk slightly, listening. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, holding the heat in suspended silence. Ghost breathing faltered again. There was a pause, too long, too empty. Maya lifted her head sharply, panic flashing through her exhaustion. For one terrible second, it seemed as if the calf had slipped beyond reach. Then Ghost inhaled. The breath was thin and uneven, but it was there. His chest lifted, his trunk twitched faintly against the dirt. Maya answered with another low sound, softer this time, relief and fear tangled together. She dusted him again, though her movements had slowed, each pass of her trunk costing more than the last. Ruth stepped forward. Just one step. But in that step was a shift the herd felt immediately. She moved closer to the center, close enough that her shadow touched Ghost's pale flank. She did not touch him. She did not comfort Maya. She simply stood there, present, claiming the moment. June's ears lifted. Duke turned slightly inward, tightening the perimeter. The engine noise faded again, as if whoever was out there had stopped, uncertain. The hyenas remained unseen but vocal now, their distant calls threading through the heat, like laughter without humor. This was the moment when herds sometimes fractured. This was when instinct argued for survival at any cost. When leaving felt cruel but necessary. When the memory of one lost calf became the price paid for many lives saved. Ruth looked at the horizon. Then she looked down at Ghost. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned her head and faced Maya. Their eyes met. No sound passed between them, but the exchange was clear. This was not about sentiment. This was about responsibility, about whether the rules that had carried the herd this far could bend without breaking. In the human world, people talk about end-of-life decisions with careful language, advance directives, power of attorney, long-term care plans, ways to soften the blow of choices that can't be undone. Out here, there were no forms to sign, no advisors to consult, only the weight of leadership and the consequences that followed. Ruth did not signal retreat. She did not signal advance either. She waited. The herd waited with her. The hyena's calls grew louder. The sun burned hotter. Maya swayed slightly, catching herself before she could fall. Ghost's breathing remained shallow but steady, hanging on by a thread that felt too thin to trust. And in that suspended moment, when leaving would have been understandable, when staying felt almost reckless, the future of the herd balanced on a decision that had not yet been spoken. The almost goodbye hovered in the air, heavy and unfinished. Ruth broke the silence without a sound. She stepped fully into the circle, her massive body closing the last open space between herself, Maya, and the fallen calf. Dust shifted under her feet as she lowered her head, not in dominance, not in threat, but in acknowledgement. For the first time since Ghost collapsed, the matriarch placed herself inside the problem instead of standing at its edge. Maya felt it immediately. She lifted her head, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion, and met Ruth's gaze. The two females stood there, inches apart, breathing the same hot air, sharing the same unbearable calculation. Ghost lay between them, his pale flank rising and falling in shallow rhythm, unaware that his life now rested on something larger than instinct. Ruth extended her trunk and touched Maya's shoulder. It was a brief contact, almost ceremonial, and then she shifted again, reaching down to Ghost. The tip of her trunk brushed his forehead, light enough not to startle him. Ghost stirred weakly, a faint movement that might have been coincidence, but Ruth lingered just long enough to feel it. Then she lifted her head. The rumble that followed did not carry panic. It carried order. Low, controlled, and unmistakable, the sound traveled through the herd like a command written into bone. The response was immediate and precise. This was not confusion. This was not desperation. This was a plan being activated. Duke moved first. He turned outward and walked several paces from the circle, positioning himself squarely between the herd and the direction the hyena's calls had been coming from. His ears spread wide, his stance aggressive and unyielding. Two other adults followed him without hesitation, reinforcing the perimeter, eyes scanning, trunks raised to taste the air. June reacted next. She pivoted sharply toward the patch of cracked ground Ruth had been studying earlier, the place that looked no different than any other to an untrained eye. June hesitated for half a second, then charged forward, slamming her front feet into the soil with force. Dust flew. The earth resisted, hard and dry, but June didn't stop. Another female joined her, then another, their movements coordinated, almost practiced. They were digging, not blindly, not in panic, but with intention, feet striking, scraping, testing depth. The rhythm was steady, relentless. It was the kind of work that cost energy the herd could barely spare, the kind of gamble you make when the alternative feels worse. Maya watched, confusion and fragile hope twisting together in her chest. Ruth wasn't finished. She turned back toward the center and rumbled again, a shorter sound this time. Two adults stepped closer to Maya, flanking her on either side. They pressed in gently, creating a physical barrier that shielded Ghost from the direct sun and funneled what little breeze there was across his body. One of them used her trunk to spray dust over Ghost's back, thickening the layer Maya had started. Shade, insulation, time. Maya understood then. She leaned into the support without protest, allowing the others to share the weight she had been carrying alone. Her legs trembled, but the pressure on her sides steadied her. For the first time since Ghost had fallen, she felt something other than panic. The engine sound returned, closer now. At the edge of the brush, a vehicle slowed to a crawl. A human figure became visible, then another. They stayed at a distance, engines idling low. One of them raised a hand, signaling the others to stop. They did not approach. They did not shout. They waited. Their presence added Another layer of risk. Even careful humans changed the behavior of animals around them. Ruth flicked an ear in their direction, but did not divert her attention. Whatever help they might have offered, this was not something that could be outsourced. This was not a situation where emergency services could be called, or a claim filed, or coverage verified the way people do when health insurance or long-term care insurance becomes suddenly relevant. Out here, there was no hotline for crisis management. There was only execution. The digging intensified. June struck the ground harder now, her movements faster, more urgent. The soil gave way inch by inch, revealing darker earth beneath the surface. Another female pushed in beside her, using her weight to break through the compacted layer. The sound of earth splitting open carried through the circle, sharp and hopeful. Ruth stood watch, her body angled between Maya and the horizon, her presence a declaration. Duke held his ground at the perimeter, rumbling whenever the hyena calls edged closer. The predators remained unseen, cautious now, reassessing. This was no longer a scene of weakness. It was a fortress forming in plain sight. Ghost stirred again. Maya felt it through her trunk, a slight movement, a weak attempt to shift his head. She lowered her trunk immediately, guiding it gently, murmuring in the low frequency only elephants used among themselves. She dusted him again, slower now, conserving strength. Then, at the digging site, something changed. The dust darkened. A murmur ran through the herd, not sound, but recognition. June froze for a split second, then struck the ground again, harder. This time the earth responded differently. It collapsed inward with a dull thud, and from the break seeped a thin, dark line that caught the light. Moisture? Not much. Not yet. But real. Ruth rumbled sharply, and the diggers adjusted immediately, widening the hole, deepening it, careful not to collapse the fragile channel forming beneath their feet. The smell of damp earth rose, unmistakable and intoxicating. Maya felt her heart surge. Water was not a guarantee. It never was. But it was a possibility, a lifeline Ruth had chosen to bet the herd on. The humans at the edge of the brush noticed too. One of them raised binoculars but stayed where he was, as if understanding that crossing an invisible line now could undo everything. Ruth held her position. She did not rush toward the water. She did not signal celebration. She stood, steady and immovable, enforcing order at a moment when instinct screamed for chaos. The plan was not finished. It was only beginning. The first trickle of water changed everything, and nothing at the same time. It seeped slowly from the broken earth, darkening the soil in narrow lines that crept outward before being swallowed by dust. It wasn't a stream. It wasn't even a pool yet. Just proof that Ruth's memory of the land had not failed her. June stepped back, instinctively, her trunk lowering toward the moisture before she caught herself. Thirst had a way of hijacking discipline. After hours under the sun, after digging with already drained muscles, the urge to drink was nearly overwhelming. Ruth stopped it with her body. She moved forward and planted herself between the dig site and the rest of the herd, broad and immovable. Her presence was not aggressive, but it was absolute. No one challenged her. No one tried to slip past. The message was clear and unmistakable. Not yet. Not for us. Maya understood before anyone else did. She felt the shift ripple through the herd, felt the plan take its final, deliberate shape. Carefully, she guided Ghost closer, her trunk supporting his chest, her body leaning into the flanking adults who steadied her from both sides. Each step cost her, but she didn't hesitate. If this was the chance, she would not waste it. The hole had widened enough now that water collected in a shallow depression. The smell of it, clean, cool, unmistakable, cut through the heat like a promise. Maya lowered her trunk and dipped it carefully, drawing up a small amount. Her movements were slow, controlled, the way someone handles a fragile investment when everything else is already at risk. She turned and brought the water to Ghost's mouth. At first, nothing happened. Ghost's lips parted slightly, but the water dribbled out, soaking into the dust beneath his head. Maya froze, fear spiking sharp and sudden. She tried again, lifting his head just enough, angling her trunk more carefully this time. Ghost swallowed. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. His throat worked. A small amount of water disappeared where it belonged. A low murmur rippled through the herd, not celebration, not relief, but something deeper. Recognition. This mattered. Maya repeated the motion, again and again, rationing each mouthful as if she were managing a precious account with no overdraft protection. In the human world, people talk about protecting assets, home equity, retirement savings, long-term care funds, because once they're gone, there's no easy way back. Out here, water was the asset, and Ghost was the reason it had to be spent wisely. Ruth watched closely. She allowed no one else to drink. Not June, who stood trembling with thirst. Not Duke, whose sides heaved as he held the perimeter. Even Ruth herself did not lower her trunk. The rule held firm. The calf came first. Ghost's breathing began to change. It was still shallow, but it slowed, finding a rhythm that didn't feel so close to the edge. His eyes blinked, once, then again. A faint sound escaped him, not a cry, not fear, but something quieter, something closer to presence. Maya pressed her forehead to his. Around them, tension spiked again. The smell of water carried far, farther than blood ever had. Duke rumbled sharply, his body stiffening. From the grass beyond the circle came movement, low, deliberate, shapes shifting just out of sight. Hyenas, closer now, emboldened by the scent and the stillness. And then, from the opposite direction, a sharp metallic snap cracked the air. Everyone froze. It came again, a dry, sudden sound, unmistakable to anyone who had ever learned to fear it. Somewhere in the brush a trap had been triggered, likely by a curious predator. The sound cut through the moment like a warning shot. The herd stirred, nerves fraying. Maya lifted her head sharply, instinctively pulling Ghost closer. A sudden panic now could undo everything. One misplaced step, one rush in the wrong direction, and the calf would be crushed under the weight of good intentions. Ruth acted immediately. She rumbled, loud and commanding, a sound that overrode fear with order. Duke answered, charging forward a few steps, ears wide, issuing a threat that carried weight. The unseen predators backed off slightly, reassessing. This was no easy meal. The humans at the edge of the brush reacted too. One of them, Evan, raised his hand and signaled his team to move back. The engine cut completely. They retreated several yards, creating space, understanding instinctively that interference now could escalate the danger. In moments like these, restraint mattered more than action. A principle as true in wildlife management as it was in crisis response, emergency planning, or even high-risk insurance decisions where the wrong move compounds the loss. Maya continued feeding Ghost. Each swallow came easier than the last. His trunk twitched weakly, then lifted a fraction, brushing against hers. It wasn't strength, not yet, but it was engagement, proof that he hadn't let go. Ruth allowed it to continue only as long as necessary. When Ghost had taken enough to stabilize, not enough to waste, not enough to draw the herd into collapse, she shifted her weight and rumbled again. The message was immediate. This place was no longer safe. Water had bought them time, not sanctuary. The smell, the trap, the gathering predators, all of it meant they had to move before the cost rose higher. Maya hesitated, looking down at Ghost, fear tightening her chest. Could he stand? Could he move? Ruth stepped closer, her massive presence blocking out the horizon. She did not rush Maya. She did not force the moment. But her eyes said what needed to be said. Saving him here was only half the work. Leaving would be the harder part. Leaving was harder than staying. The water had steadied Ghost, but it had not healed him. His strength returned in fragments, just enough to be dangerous, enough to make movement possible, but not safe. the kind of fragile recovery where one wrong push could undo everything that had been earned. Ruth did not allow hesitation to turn into chaos. She rumbled once, deep and directive, and the herd responded with practiced precision. The tight circle loosened, reshaping itself into something new. Bodies shifted, not randomly, but with intention, creating lanes and buffers where none had existed moments before. Ghost was guided to the center. Two of the strongest females stepped in close on either side of Maya, pressing their shoulders gently against her, forming a living brace. Duke and another adult bull took position at the rear, their massive forms angled outward, eyes locked on the grass where the hyenas had last been heard. Ahead of them, Ruth moved first, slow and deliberate, setting the pace with the authority of someone who knew that speed now would be fatal. Maya lowered her trunk beneath Ghost's chest and leaned. Ghost tried. His legs shook violently as he pushed up, hooves scraping against the hard ground. For a brief, heart-stopping second, it looked as if he might stand on his own. Then his weight shifted unevenly, and his body sagged forward again. The herd closed in instantly. The two flanking females pressed tighter, absorbing his weight. Maya adjusted, bracing her side against his shoulder, keeping him upright by force of proximity rather than strength. Ghost remained standing, not because he could, but because he was held. They moved like that, slow, measured, silent. Each step was negotiated by three bodies instead of one. When Ghost stumbled, the herd adjusted. When Maya faltered, another shoulder filled the gap. The formation flexed and adapted, a living system responding in real time. The sun beat down relentlessly. Sweat darkened the skin around Maya's eyes. Her breathing grew labored, every step draining what little reserve she had left. In the human world, people talk about caregiver burnout, about the toll of long-term care when one person shoulders too much for too long. Maya didn't have the language for that, but she lived the truth of it with every trembling muscle. The hyenas tested the perimeter. A shape darted closer, then veered away when Duke snapped his trunk forward and rumbled low. The predators were careful now. This was no longer a helpless calf left behind. This was a fortress in motion. Behind the herd, the humans followed at a distance. Evan and his team moved parallel, engines off, keeping space between themselves and the elephants. They spoke in low voices, pointing, tracking movement with binoculars. They did not intervene. They understood that this was not a situation where emergency response or rescue services applied. Any attempt to help could fracture the delicate balance holding Ghost upright. The herd slowed again. Ghost's breathing quickened, shallow and strained. His legs began to tremble more violently, his weight sagging against Maya despite the support. The distance they had covered felt insignificant compared to what remained. Then Ghost collapsed. This time it happened without warning. His front legs folded, and the rest of his body followed, dragging Maya with him. She went down hard on one knee, a sound tearing from her chest as she fought to stay upright. Dust exploded around them, and for a split second, the formation broke. Ruth reacted instantly. She pivoted and charged back toward the center, placing herself between Ghost and the open corridor. Duke and the others tightened the rear line, rumbling loudly, stamping, making themselves large. The herd did not scatter. They closed ranks. Maya struggled to her feet, shaking, her side heaving. She reached for Ghost immediately, panic flashing through exhaustion. Ghost lay on his side again, chest heaving, eyes rolling, breath coming in sharp, uneven pulls. The hyenas crept closer. They could sense the weakness, the pause, the vulnerability. This was the moment predators waited for, the moment when movement stopped and order threatened to collapse. Ruth did not retreat. She stood over Ghost, legs planted, head lowered, ears wide. Her presence alone was a barrier. The herd mirrored her stance, forming a tight, unmoving wall around the fallen calf. No one drank, no one fled, no one broke formation. It was a standoff. Minutes passed. The heat pressed down. The hyenas circled just out of reach, unwilling to commit, unwilling to leave. The humans watched from afar, tense and silent, aware that any miscalculation here could end in disaster, a reminder that even in human crises, whether it's emergency planning, high-risk liability, or financial protection in uncertain situations, timing and restraint often matter more than force. Ghost's breathing began to slow again. Maya dusted him gently, her movements weaker now, her trunk shaking with fatigue. She pressed her forehead to his side and stayed there, refusing to look away, refusing to prepare herself for an ending she wasn't ready to accept. Ruth waited. When Ghost finally stirred, just a twitch, just enough to prove he was still with them, Ruth made the next decision. They would move again, but this time they would not rush. They would carry him the only way they could. The moving shield closed in tighter, adjusting its shape, preparing to lift, to brace, to risk. Everything one more time. Ahead of them lay safety, or the illusion of it. Behind them waited death. And the herd chose forward. Night arrived without ceremony. The sun slipped below the horizon as if it had done its damage and moved on, leaving the corridor wrapped in a thin, uneasy cool. The heat loosened its grip, but it did not release the tension. Darkness brought relief and risk in equal measure. The herd reached the low basin just after dusk. It wasn't the kind of place that appeared on maps or promised safety. It was simply lower ground, sheltered by scattered trees and rock, where the air held a hint of moisture and the wind moved differently. A place Ruth had chosen not because it was ideal, but because it was possible. They stopped there. Ghost lay at the center again, his pale body streaked with dust and sweat, his sides rising and falling in shallow but steady rhythm. He had survived the move, but only just. His eyes were half open now, unfocused, drifting in and out, of awareness, like someone hovering between sleep and pain. Maya barely noticed when the others settled. Her legs trembled as she stood over Ghost, exhaustion finally catching up to her. The injury she had taken earlier burned hot and deep, each breath pulling pain through her side. She ignored it. She always had. Mothers learned early that their own limits were suggestions, not rules. Ruth surveyed the basin carefully before allowing anything else to happen. She positioned Duke and the other bulls at the outer edges, anchoring the perimeter. The females formed a loose inner ring, not tight enough to smother, not loose enough to invite intrusion. The hyenas lingered at a distance, their shapes barely visible against the dark, frustrated now, unwilling to challenge a united front. Only then did Ruth allow the herd to drink. But even then, she controlled the order. Ghost first. Maya lowered her trunk into the shallow pool at the basin's edge and lifted the water slowly, carefully. Her movements were slower now, heavy with fatigue. She brought the water to Ghost's mouth, supporting his head as she had before. He drank. Not much, just enough. Enough to wet his throat, to settle his breathing, to pull him back from the edge he had hovered over all day. His trunk lifted weakly and brushed against Maya's foreleg, a small, unconscious gesture that carried more meaning than any sound. Only after that did Ruth step aside. The rest of the herd drank quietly, efficiently, without crowding or urgency. There was no celebration, no relief loud enough to tempt fate, just discipline, born of understanding what had already been paid. The humans watched from far off, their shapes barely visible now. Evan lowered his binoculars and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had done what they could by doing very little, by staying back, by not turning a fragile rescue into a spectacle or an intervention gone wrong. In many ways, it mirrored the hardest lesson in human crisis response. Sometimes the most responsible action is restraint, whether you're dealing with wildlife, medical emergencies, or high-risk situations where liability and unintended consequences outweigh good intentions. As the night deepened, Ghost began to shiver. The heat of the day had masked it before, but now the fever revealed itself fully. His breathing grew uneven again, and his skin felt hot beneath Maya's trunk. Infection from the wire scrape had taken hold. Water alone could not erase that. Maya felt it, She leaned closer, her body curling around him, sharing warmth where she could, pressing dust and earth against his wound to keep it clean, to keep it closed. Her movements slowed, each one costing more than the last. Her breathing became labored, the injury in her side flaring sharply whenever she shifted. Ruth noticed. She moved closer, studying Maya now the way she had studied Ghost hours earlier. The calculation returned, colder this time, heavier. The herd could not afford another collapse. They could not fight two battles at once. Maya swayed. For the first time since Ghost had fallen, her legs gave slightly, forcing her to brace hard to stay upright. A low sound escaped her chest, less a cry than a release of pain she had held back for too long. Ghost stirred at the sound. His head lifted weakly, his eyes focused, just for a moment, finding Maya where she stood above him. He made a small, rasping sound, and then his trunk reached out, clumsy, uncoordinated, and touched her leg. The contact steadied him. It did not steady her. Maya's legs buckled. The fall was slower than Ghost's had been, but heavier. She dropped to one knee, then settled onto her side, breath tearing from her chest as the injury finally demanded attention. Dust rose around her, illuminated faintly by moonlight. The herd froze. June moved first, stepping in close, her trunk hovering over Maya, unsure whether to lift or wait. Duke rumbled sharply at the perimeter, warning the hyenas back as they edged closer at the scent of vulnerability. Ruth stepped forward. She stood between Maya and the open night, her presence absolute. She lowered her head and touched Maya's shoulder with her trunk, not to lift her, not yet, but to acknowledge the shift that had just occurred. Ghost struggled then, pushing weakly against the ground, inching closer to his mother. He collapsed halfway, but he did not stop trying. He dragged himself the rest of the distance and pressed his head against Maya's chest, his small body trembling. Maya responded instinctively, wrapping her trunk around him, holding him close despite the pain. Her breathing slowed as she focused on that contact, on the weight of her calf against her, grounding her. Ruth watched the two of them for a long moment. Then she rumbled, softly this time. The herd adjusted. June and another female moved in on Maya's other side, pressing gently, sharing warmth, sharing the burden. Someone dusted Maya's flank the way she had dusted Ghost all day, cooling her skin, protecting her wound. The circle tightened, not around Ghost this time, but around them both. The rule had shifted. Ghost had been saved by the herd's decision to act together, to prioritize the weakest when it made no practical sense. Now Maya would be held by that same rule, not because it was efficient, not because it was safe, but because it was who they were. By morning, Ghost was still alive. So was Maya. Both were diminished. Both would carry the cost of that day forward, written into muscle and memory. Survival had not come clean or free. It never did. As dawn broke over the basin, Ruth stood at the edge of the circle, watching the light return to the land. The herd stirred slowly, quietly, preparing to move again when the time was right. They had not won. They had endured. And in the wild, that was the closest thing to a miracle there was. Before you leave, I want to ask you something simple. If you believe the herd made the right choice, leave a 1 in the comments. If you think survival should come before loyalty, leave a 0. You don't need to explain yourself. Sometimes a single number says enough. And if this story made you pause, even for a moment, please consider subscribing to the channel. We share true-to-life stories like this. Stories about choice, sacrifice, and the quiet moments in nature that reflect our own lives more than we expect. The next story is already waiting. Thank you for watching. Thank you.